If you believe that ghosts are the departed souls of once living people who have survived death and are now living in another dimension connected with our own, then you're not alone. Most people believe ghosts exist because of a personal incident in their experience. Some people are more cerebral, and they cite the First Law of Thermodynamics, which says energy cannot be created or destroyed, but only change forms. Could that form be a ghost? It seems like a reasonable assumption. Religious teachings make it clear that ghosts exist, and their function is connected with the will of the divine. Our community member writes this: in the 2 years that I worked at the Palace movie theater, I found ghosts, unexplained happenings, and I died at least once. I'm a believer. My story is below, and this is something you all should know. Welcome to Audio Stories of the Paranormal. I'm J.B. Simeon. Thank you for listening. This experience is provided by community member Wade Grayson. He shares a story of working at a haunted movie theater named the Palace. He calls this experience Memories of a Haunted Movie House. Now, I ask that if you enjoy audio stories of the paranormal, that you tell your family, friends, and associates about the show. Please help them download or stream the show to their smartphones or whatever connected device they may use. You can find this show at www.theaudiostories.com. When you get to the website, all you have to do is select the story that you want to hear and press play. Also, please send me a short email at feedback@theaudiostories.com. I'd like to have your input, feedbacks, or your suggestions about improving the show. Again, thank you very much for listening. And after this quick break, the story will begin. Welcome back to Memories of a Haunted Movie House from Audio Stories of the Paranormal. Okay, let's learn something. Wade writes, for my first 2 years after high school graduation in 1978, I worked at a very old downtown movie theater in a large southern city. While I went to junior college to improve my grades, the theater was called the Palace. Before I began working there, I'd heard stories from my friends that the Palace was haunted. The stories that I heard were about specters watching movies with the audience. The tales were wild enough to initially keep me away because, where I came from, we believe in ghosts. However, Ken, one of the owners, made it seem so exciting, so I had to see for myself what was going on. Mostly, I worked a concession stand or served as an usher. Sometimes, I sold tickets from the booth out front. One afternoon, I was in the booth selling tickets when two motherly-type women and a small girl came up to the counter. One of the women ordered 2 tickets and paid. Then they both turned away to enter the lobby. Quickly, I told them that the little girl needed a ticket also. They turned their heads and looked back at me, puzzled. Looking around, they asked, "What little girl?" I turned to look at the little girl, and I started to point to where she was standing, but the word "her" froze in my mouth because the little girl was gone. Recovering, I said, "Sorry, never mind." I'm sure they thought that it was a bad joke gone wrong. I told my co-workers about the disappearing little girl. They asked me to describe her, so I told them that she was about 8 years old. She was a slim black girl with pigtails. She was wearing an off-white sundress that hung to her knees. Their eyes widened. I learned that her name was Peg. She's one of the ghosts that haunts the theater. They told me that if I stayed on the job long enough, then I would encounter her many times, and I did. Peg liked to play in the closed-off balcony space. From there, she would drop popcorn on people sitting in the audience below. She would also take things the staff would later find in the balcony at the same seat every time. It said that she accidentally fell from the balcony in the 1940s to the main floor below when she leaned too far over the railing attempting to keep something from dropping. But that's the polite story of her death. I learned the truth from Ken. Until the mid-1960s, the balcony was the only place that black people could sit in the theater while watching movies. The white teenage ushers in those days liked to bully the black movie patrons because they couldn't retaliate or fight back. The teenage ushers ruled that balcony like a personal kingdom. Peg was with a small group of girls that made the mistake of talking back to an usher. Filled with rage, the usher grabbed the smallest girl in the group, Peg, and threw her over the edge of the balcony. When she landed, she struck her head on the floor. She died in the theater from her injuries. The police refused to arrest the usher, but he was fired. Her death was officially recorded as an accident. Since then, Peg has haunted the theater. She plays harmless tricks on the staff and the audience. They say that she's a very curious child because sometimes she follows you home. I and my mother can assure you that she does indeed follow you home. So can the usher who threw her over the balcony. She haunted him until he went insane and committed suicide. When I was there, another odd thing happened on Sunday nights. A very old lady who was 90-something years old named Miss Helen would purchase 2 tickets. That was strange because she always came to the theater alone. However, while sitting in the audience, she behaved as though she had an invisible friend with her. I was told by one of the guys that she had been coming to the theater on Sunday nights for as long as anyone could remember. He said that Miss Helen told him that she was in the audience when the Palace had its grand opening in 1903. It was a vaudeville theater then, and she came with her parents to see a magic performance by Harry Houdini. She said that the Palace became a silent movie theater in 1915. Then she watched the movie Birth of a Nation there. In the 1930s, it became a sound movie theater. She watched Gone with the Wind and The Wizard of Oz. All her life she visited the theater, first as a child, then as a teen, a young woman, a wife, a mother, a grandmother, and now as a retired widow, great-grandmother. Each week she took the same seats because they held a lot of memories. When I was an usher, I sometimes absorbed her leaning her head to one side. It was as though it were resting on the shoulder of an unseen person. She held her hand as though it was entwined with another person's hand. It was not unusual to see her whispering into the ear of her invisible companion. The guy who told me Miss Helen's history also explained that Miss Helen believed that she had a standing date with her deceased husband every Sunday night. They would sit and cuddle the same way they had done together for over 60 years before he died in that theater in the seat next to her of a heart attack. Several times, when the light reflected off the movie screen fell in a certain way in the darkness, I could see the outline of an old man sitting beside her with his arm around her shoulders, while her head rested lovingly on his shoulder. I'm not alone. A lot of other people also seen them together. There came a time when we had not seen Miss Helen for a while. Then, one Sunday night, I was walking the aisles to get a count of the number of people in the theater. The light from the screen temporarily brightened the darkness. It was then that I noticed two shadow figures sitting in Mrs. Helen's regular seats. It was the outline of Miss Helen and her husband. Her head was resting on his shoulder, and she was whispering something into his ear. From then on, they were continually seen together on Sunday nights, just enjoying the film and each other's company. They paid no attention to anyone around them. When you rejoin us in the next segment, you'll learn why ghosts haunt theaters. You'll also encounter unexplained happenings in the theater and found out how Wade died just once. Welcome back to Memories of a Haunted Movie House. In the last segment, we learned about two ghosts who haunted the Palace Movie Theater. In this segment, you'll learn about more ghosts, why ghosts haunt theaters, the phantom of the men's room, and how Wade died at least once. Okay, let's learn something. The theater was open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. When it was very cold or very hot, we got our largest audiences. For $3, the price of one ticket, a person could spend 5 hours warm and dry or cool and dry. The management didn't mind if the audience slept, ate food from outside, or drank liquor. So we got pushers, drug addicts, prostitutes, and their customers in the theater. All kinds of illicit activity occurred in the restrooms and in the darkened corners of the theater. On occasions, someone on the staff or one of the movie patrons would discover the victim of a drug overdose in a restroom or in the audience. In the men's room, the in-toilet stall was haunted by the ghost of a man who had overdosed on heroin a few years before I started working there. Days after he was found dead, men would come up to the usher to report a man partially laying inside the stall, passed out on the floor, with a needle still in his arm. When the usher would investigate, they always found that the stall was locked from the inside out and unoccupied. I hated going into the men's room alone. When it was my turn to clean the men's room, I would hear noises like that stall was occupied. I would look in the gap between the door and the frame and see the form of a man on the toilet. After some time, I would knock on the door and announce that I needed to clean that stall and ask how much longer he would be. But no one would answer. I would peep through the gap again, the gap between the stall door and the frame, and no one would be inside, but the door would still be locked from the inside. That was one of the reasons we all thought it was haunted. That and all the drug addicts who were found dead in the theater, and there were many, were all found in that stall. If a person was found in another stall and they had a drug overdose, the chances are they would live. Only people found in that haunted stall died. I think the ghost did something to them. Still, what happens remains a mystery. In the auditorium, with just the right light coming off the screen, you could see the outline of specters sitting and watching the movie or touching the living movie patrons. Jerry, one of the owners, claimed to have psychic abilities. He explained that to the ghosts, the palace was a feeding ground, a free restaurant. He said that most of the ghosts that are hanging around in the theater didn't die there. They linger because of the living. They drain the energy from the living when they are watching films or when we are working. He said earthbound ghosts need the energy of the living to keep from fading from existence. Most people, he said, are unaware that the energy is being stolen from them. Suddenly, when we feel lightheaded or disoriented or nauseated and we're a healthy person, it's likely happening because our energy is being drained by a ghost. He said ghosts can be very quiet. They can silently move from person to person, consuming energy like a vampire. He thought that many people who were classified as having died from drug overdose actually had their life force drained because they were incapacitated and easy prey for the ghost. Another unexplained paranormal thing that happened to me several times is seeing myself doing the task I was about to do or starting the task I had just finished. Here's an example. I was inside the projection room working, and I was standing in the projection room doorway at the same time watching me work in the projection room. I was existing in two places at once. I could see myself watching myself from both locations. This only lasted a few seconds, then I was bumped from behind by the projectionist, and I found myself standing in the doorway only. Whatever was in the projection room disappeared. The remaining time that I worked there, I would frequently see myself doing the task that I was about to do or coming to start the task that I had just finished. I would always disappear once I realized that I could see myself from the other body at the same time. To my knowledge, no one else in the theater experienced this weird time slip. I wonder, can a living person also be a ghost? That was not the only time something paranormal happened to me while I was there. It was summer, and I was swimming in our backyard pool one night after work. I was home alone. My mother was at a neighbor's house, and my dad was on a business trip. I forget where my sister was. At that time, I thought I was a highly skilled swimmer, and I was good at doing tricks using the diving board. On one of the tricks, I slipped and managed to hit the back of my head on the end of the diving board. That knocked me out. The next thing I remember is throwing up water and grasping for air. My neighbor, who was a nurse, gave me artificial respiration, CPR. She and her husband and my mother had located me on the bottom of the pool and pulled me out. When she began artificial respiration, I had no pulse and I was not breathing. They were not sure how long I had been in the water. She, the nurse, later confided confided to me that she had told her husband that I was dead and not coming back. Here's how they found me. My mother was at their house, and they were all sitting in the backyard around a picnic table. A little black girl came running up to the table and interrupted their conversation. They thought it was very strange to see a black child there. We lived in a segregated town, and there were no black families in our neighborhood. The little girl excitedly told my mother that I hit my head on the diving board and was in our pool drowning. My mother knew that something was wrong and came running with our neighbor, the nurse, and her husband back to our house. Just as the little girl said, they found me on the bottom of the pool. I learned about all this the next day in the hospital. I had the worst chlorine headache in my life. I told them that nobody was with me in the backyard. I don't know where that little girl came from. I asked my mother to describe her, and she described Peg. I told them what I knew about Peg as a ghost. My mother said that she knew there was something special about that child. Days later, when I returned to work, I placed some flowers and toys for Peg on her favorite chair in the balcony, and I thanked her in my thoughts for saving my life. I never saw Peg again, but I hope she enjoyed the flowers and the toys. If she hadn't followed me home that night, we would both be ghosts now. A few weeks later, I quit working at the Palace because I graduated junior college and was moving to California to study at UCLA. The Palace was torn down 5 years later and replaced with an office building. I like to think that Peg and all the other specters have moved on to heaven, but I suspect that Peg is now enjoying visiting all the people who work in that building one at a time. Okay, Paranormals, that ends our story. Thank you, Wade Grayson, for sharing your experience at the Palace Movie Theater with the community. I think after hearing your story, I have developed a phobia about going to movies. Did you all know before this story that the living or food, a type of all-you-can-eat buffet for ghosts? Still, I think it's so cool that a child ghost is concerned enough with the living to save your life. Let's hope she has moved on to her well-deserved reward. If you have a comment on Wade's experience or you want to share a paranormal experience of your own, please contact me at feedback@theaudiostories.com or go to www.theaudiostories.com and post your reply in the contact form on the homepage. Also, please just send an email to us to let us know that you're listening and tell us what app you're listening on. Before we end this episode, I'm inviting all listeners to visit the audiostories.com merchandise store. There is a link to the store on the homepage at our website, www.theaudiostories.com, and in the show notes of this episode. At the merch store, you will find high-quality Audio Stories merchandise. Your purchases will not only provide you with really cool stuff, it will provide us with the means to keep producing the audio stories of the paranormal each week. So please visit. You are our main source of support. That concludes this episode of Audio Stories of the Paranormal. Thank you again, Wade Grayson, for sharing your experience, and thank you all for joining us. I hope you have enjoyed this experience and that you will join us for the next episode. Until then, please remember to be aware, be cautious, and take care.